Hello, I'm Anne Monahan. I'm a 5-year resident of GHA in Alexandria. Um, One thing you may want to know for background is that I've been both in my careers as a priest, a Capitol Hill staffer, and a reporter. So, task ahead of me is to remember 9/11 as if it could ever be forgotten. It started out as a beautiful day. It was a very busy day. It was already scheduled pretty heavily for me. When I got up, went downstairs, made coffee, grabbed my cup of coffee, went in the sitting room, turned on the television, and the world changed. It was 8:30-ish, as I recall, and I looked at the screen and I was Today, NBC's Today, and I was expecting, the usual thing for today, and it looked like they were running the towering inferno. I saw this image, smoke, tall buildings, couldn't figure it out. And then I realized what was off was that it wasn't a movie, it was a news broadcast. I heard the narrator's voice, and that's when I learned that a plane, and later on a second plane, had gone into the World Trade Center towers. I'd been to the World Trade Center. I'd been at the top of the World Trade Center years ago when I was working on Capitol Hill for a brunch. So I remembered the view from there, which made me think about what the view from there was today. Well, as I said, my day was already pretty heavily scripted and scheduled. I was scheduled for open heart surgery in 2 days, and that was going to make for a very busy September 11th. I had to call a doctor's office and arrange an interview with him because just before the close of business the day before, my heart surgeon had to cancel and reschedule my surgery with a doctor I did not know. And I have a rule: no knife cuts into this body unless the cutter really knows who I am and has had a conversation with me. So I wanted to set up a conversation with the doctor. That was at the top of the schedule. And then I had to pack a go back for the hospital. I had some last minute calls to make, last minute checks to write. And at 1 o'clock that afternoon, I was scheduled to meet with my priest at Maine Memorial. And that was to finalize my funeral plans. Now, I was not expecting to die. I was not hoping to die. But I have learned over the years that it's a very good thing to plan your funeral. It's a last gift you give your family, that they really know what were Mother's favorite hymns, what prayers Mother wanted. I've seen too much of people being torn apart and having little fights just in the wake of a death over what the funeral is going to be like. So I was planning this, and all that changed. I watched, and the enormity of it took so long to sink in. At first, thinking maybe it's an accident. Maybe I knew a plane had once run into the Empire State Building. Maybe that was a repeat, only this was a very big plane that had run into the World Trade Center. And then the second plane showed up, and we knew. I knew, everybody knew. It was terror. And I felt that terror. I have two modes in times of crisis that I kind of kick into. One is the reporter's mode, which makes me think, boy, what a big story. How's it being covered? Who's covering it? What would I be doing? And the priest mode, which is, how is this affecting people? How can I help, if at all? And they both kicked in. As I recall, I called my daughters. We didn't know exactly what was happening. It was hours later that the plane crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And until then, there was a good possibility and it was spoken about that it might be headed for the capital. And I was in Old Town Alexandria, and I was within, as my father would have said, spitting distance of the capital. But I didn't think of leaving. It was just too much to do. I watched with everyone as the story unfolded, as bit by bit the pieces fell into horrible, terrifying place. I I think the saving grace was that I had a 1 o'clock appointment with my priest at the church. I called her and I said, "Do you still want me to come? Is it okay? Are you busy?" She says, "Oh no, come. I need somebody here." I went. We sat down. I had already done a lot of planning, and I had a lot of notes about how the service was to go together. I found that was the best use of my time, the best expenditure of my emotional energy at that point was to plan my funeral. Because when you do that, you think about what your life has been like, how your life is reflected, perhaps, or enriched by Scripture. And you're choosing Scripture. And you want the Scripture to be part of a last communication with those you love, those who come to the funeral. And it's the same way with music. Never wanted my kids to sit there and say, "Oh, that was Mom's favorite hymn. You've got to have that hymn." And another child saying, "Oh no, Mom told me once she thought that was the sappiest Victorian hymn she'd ever heard." It wasn't going to be any of that with me. I chose, in discussing it with my priest, I chose the hymns. I chose the structure of the funeral. I chose who would be making short little memories, memorial, whatever you call them, reflections, and who would be the preacher. It was such a good way to spend that time. It distanced me some from what was happening, but it helped me to review my life and to realize that even if my life didn't extend beyond that evening, that I had done something. It brought back so many good memories, so many reflections on times past. I was very thankful when I left that meeting. The rest of the day, I did get in touch with the doctor who was glad to talk with me in person the next evening, the evening before surgery. That was taken care of. I spoke to my children. "How are you doing?" My son-in-law had been on the front lawn within a mile of the Pentagon, holding the baby, when he felt this tremendous shaking. That was when the plane had hit the Pentagon. Everybody had their little memories. The whole family was looking for Ginny. Ginny is my husband's cousin. And Ginny was scheduled to be at a meeting within 2 blocks of the White House that morning. And the family in upstate New York, the family in California, the family all over was wondering, where is Ginny? Is Ginny okay? I was able to ascertain that. I went into reporting mode at the same time I was in priest mode, making calls, kind of being the communicator. It made me feel useful. It helped me to get through you have this quiet in the middle of disaster. Things are falling down, but you feel isolated and alone and so quiet and even useless. And I didn't feel that way. And that's one of the things I learned from 9/11. In priest mode, I began to think maybe I should postpone the surgery because as the death toll mounted, and we realized that there would be a number of casualties from Washington and the Washington area, the thought occurred to me, will there be enough clergy to do the funerals? So I briefly considered canceling my surgery. I'm glad I didn't. I was up late that night. It was a matter of a lot of emailing, a lot of comforting people, a lot of praying. I had prayed from the time I realized that that plane that hit the tower, had hit the World Trade Tower deliberately. And I prayed, and I felt the panic, the terror of the people on the plane, in the buildings, and I was able to pray for them and pray for the presence of God and the peace of God to wrap around them. Didn't get to bed until late that night. Who could sleep? The footage was still coming in. They were still putting together the pieces. And about 1 a.m, I thought to myself, I wonder how this is being covered by the press in other countries. And I searched and found the Toronto Globe online. And I had gone all day on the verge of tears. But it was then, in reading the Toronto Globe online, that the tears came. When I discovered that as soon as the word had come that the World Trade Center had been attacked, Canadians all over Canada had lined up at blood banks to donate. It still moves me. And today, as I contemplate the 20th anniversary of this horrible day that changed our lives forever, I find myself more in priest mode than in reporter mode. I find myself praying for peace, praying for the end of war, and thankful to God for all the people who that day were gifts to me, my priest, my neighbors, my family, the doctor I hadn't really met. They were all gifts. And that meant on September 12th, I was able to get up and move ahead. Thank you for listening.